Also going to introduce our speaker, and his name is Dr. Richard Ingram. He is a board certified nephrologist and and also board certified in internal medicine. He completed his fellowship in nephrology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He has been with the LaGrange internal medicine since 1984. He started when he was 2 years old. He enjoys public speaking, racquetball, tennis, bridge, reading history, biology, and I just found out he's now doing some pickleball, like Bonnie and I. But the reason Dr. Ingram is with us today is because he is the chair of the Lafayette Alliance in LaGrange, Georgia. And LaGrange, Georgia is named after the place where Lafayette retired in LaGrange, France. And he is the chair of the Lafayette Alliance. They were formed in 2017, and they're very energetic group there in Georgia. And they hosted us for our annual meeting in June of 2023. And he did a great job. They all did a great job down there in LaGrange. And I was so impressed with what they did. I wanted Dr. Ingram to meet all of you. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring him up on the screen. Hold on one second here. Dr. Richard Ingram.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be on this platform with Lafayette scholars, the ones who have been on this platform and the ones who are to come. I mean, the likes of Alan Hoffman and Lloyd Kramer and Paul Spaulding and Robert Rhodes Kraut. And I believe on deck we have coming up Paul Spaulding and Iris DeRode. So it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for taking time out. I mean, after all, you could be watching Perry Mason or Gunsmoke. So I appreciate you taking time to be with us. I am not a certified Lafayetteologist. Let me be transparent about that, but I do admit to pretensions. Here's my argument. Lafayette is for everybody, anywhere, all the time. And I'd like to tell you why I think that is true. And then I'd like to give you some examples of what we're trying to do here, trying to create things that will tell Lafayette's story, but in a way that will appeal to a broader audience. So here's the plan. Number one, Lafayette and the LaGrange City Council. Number two, Lafayette and the idea of wonder and the Lafayette effect. Number three, Lafayette is a how-to book. There are 8 chapters. Number 4, Lafayette and Frederick Douglass paired. Number 5, a template for learning Lafayette. And number 6, this will be the world premiere, a little example of Lafayette in rhythm and rhyme. And then number 7, New Orleans, June the 11th through 14th. We have a lot of ground to cover. Buckle up. First, here a couple of weeks ago, I had occasion to talk with the LaGrange City Council, and I would like to tell you what I told them and to give you an understanding of why I think Lafayette is important. There are 2 things that you need to know as a premise before I tell you what I told them. First, LaGrange is a community of about 30,000. It's here in west central Georgia. And on Lafayette Square, right in the middle of town, we have a remarkable statue of General Lafayette. It's an exact copy of the statue that is in the roundabout at Le Puy-en-Velay, right near where Lafayette was born, at Chateau de Chevignac. The second thing you need to know is Willie Edmondson was our mayor. He died unexpectedly. But he was the first African-American mayor of LaGrange. He was accessible, he was respected, and his name will surface. So let me tell you what I told LaGrange City Council 2 weeks ago. I have an unusual request, I suppose. I would like to encourage you to persuade people to learn Lafayette. Willie Edmondson, when he was mayor, conceded that he didn't know Lafayette. I gave him a copy of Stanley Idzerta's essay. He read it, and then he came back and said that he understood. Lafayette stands for liberty, equality, and justice. The American Revolution, he was there. The French Revolution, he was in the thick of it. Lafayette was an abolitionist. On February the 5th, 1783, he wrote this 8-page letter to Washington, and in the middle of it, he suggests a template for emancipation. He suggests that the two of them go in together and they buy an estate, that they have slaves to work it, but no corporal punishment. They would pay them for their labor, educate them, and then when they got their footing, would free them. Washington wrote back 2 months later on April the 5th saying, this is a laudable idea. Let's talk about the logistics and the details, which they did in 1784 when Lafayette visited Mount Vernon, but it didn't work out. But the following year in 1785, Lafayette writes Henry Knox to say, I've done it. I purchased the land, 70 slaves, no corporal punishment. I'm going to educate them, pay them for their labor. When they get their footing, we'll free them. And then the vortex of the French Revolution, and it was all destroyed. Lafayette's fortune and his land all confiscated. But Lafayette had this idea. Later, Lafayette would promote the ideas of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and he promoted independence movements in Ireland, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Greece, Poland, to say nothing of North and South America. A 10-foot tall, 1,500-pound cast bronze statue, an image of Lafayette in the middle of town, can inspire, illuminate, and unite if people know the story, if they know what he stands for. Lafayette matters. He matters because he can make a difference. And because he can make a difference, he's relevant. He's relevant if you know the story, you know what he stands for, and he can change how you think and how you behave. 3 suggestions. Number 1, please read the essay by Stanley Deserta. I've given each of you a copy. Second, read my column every Thursday, LaGrange Daily News, the digital edition, explaining Lafayette. Go ahead, ante up for a subscription. Third, here's the challenge. In your positions of influence, your seats on the city council, when you make comment, when you express an opinion, sprinkle it with Lafayette. Reference Lafayette. No lecture, no sermon, just a drive-by suggestion to learn Lafayette. A 10-foot tall, 1,500-pound cast bronze statue of Lafayette in the middle of town makes Lafayette our brand. It's a brand to be proud of if you know the story and if you know what he stands for. Thank you. All right, now, so that's what I told the city council. Whether or not it takes root, whether or not it bears fruit, time will tell. I did have one city council member say that he had questions about Lafayette, and we're emailing now, trying to get a time where I can reply to his questions. Now, part 2. So Lafayette and the idea of wonder. This is a novel argument, I think, but I think it holds some validity. This idea of wonder and awe. So Julie Boutwell Peterson, she teaches in the Lewis Honors programs at the University of Kentucky. She wrote an article in the winter edition of the American Scholar, which is a publication of the Phi Beta Kappa. And the title of her article was The Wonder of It All, In Search of Awe. She quotes Dasher Keltner, who is the founder of the Greater Good Science Center at the University of California, Berkeley. Keltner interviewed thousands of people, 20 language groups, in search of what provokes in us a sense of wonder, this sense of awe. It's that feeling you get that permeates that veil to transcendence and to mystery. there is a sense that whenever you feel that, whenever any of us feels it, it tends to elevate us. It tends to incline us toward our better angels, is the word. Keltner found that there were several things that will do this. And this has been written about, and it's almost kind of a spiritual connotation to it in a way. So, in fact, years ago, Rudolf Otto in 1923 wrote a book called The Idea of the Holy, and he talked about this idea of wonder and awe. And then subsequent to that, C.S. Lewis, he called it the numinous in his book in 1940, The Problem of Pain. But they're all talking about wonder, awe, and permeating that veil to transcendence and to this mystery. And the things that can provoke it, for instance, visions of Mount Everest or of the Tetons or standing at the lip of the south rim of the Grand Canyon. But there are things even more subtle that can provoke it. 1954 World Series, Game 1. Willie Mays is in center field. Vic Wertz hits a long fly ball. It's in the 8th inning. It's tied 2-2. And on the warning track, Willie Mays, with his back to home plate, catches the ball over his left shoulder. The catch of the century. That sense of wonder. By the way, the New York Giants, they played with Cleveland Indians. The New York Giants won that game 5-2 and also won the World Series. But there are other, even more subtle things that can provoke wonder. For instance, the match of the century. So 1972, Bobby Fischer against Boris Spassky in Reykjavik, Iceland. Many of you remember that. Well, in the 6th game, the 20th move, Bobby Fischer takes his pawn to E4. Stunned silence. He won the game with that move. The gallery applauded, and his opponent, Boris Spassky, applauds. There are other things, even simpler, that can provoke this sense of wonder. Bobby Darin's 18 Yellow Roses. Dean Martin. I'm a Dean Martin fan from way back. Take good care of her. Here's the deal. Keltner says, however, that there is one thing that will provoke a sense of wonder, bar none, hands down, case closed, period, at the end of a sentence. Here's what he says. It's the selfless and courageous acts of fellow humans, their heroic deeds or ability to overcome setbacks that we cannot get enough of, that brings us to our knees. For example, when I read what Captain Johann Ewald, at the close of the American Revolutionary War, commenting to his diary, he says this: who would have thought 100 years ago that out of this multitude of rabble would arise a people who could defy kings? Or yet another example. So Lafayette, this is in 1789. The National Assembly is trying to construct a new constitution, and they've hit an impasse. It's all going to implode. And it's over the veto. They're territorial. Claims are staked. On one side are those who do not want the king to have a veto. Absolutely not. On the other side are those who want the king to have a veto. Absolutely. Lafayette gets in touch with his friend, who is now ambassador in Paris, Thomas Jefferson. This is on August the 25th, 1789, and asked Jefferson to clear his calendar. And he asked Jefferson to host a meeting, a debate, the following night on August 26th. 8 debaters, 4 from each side, Lafayette will facilitate to try to come to some compromise. This is an unusual request for an ambassador, but Jefferson agrees to do it. So on that following, and by the way, they didn't have it at Jefferson's home, 183 Rue de Bourbon, because Jefferson said there's always chaos there. There are always people over there. So they have it at Jefferson's home. And Jefferson, this is in Mike Duncan's book, Duncan quotes Jefferson. Jefferson observed this. 8 people, Lafayette facilitating, and for 6 hours, Jefferson listened to debate. And here is what he says, and it's stunning. During which time, Jefferson said, I was a silent witness to a coolness and candor of argument unusual in the conflicts of political opinion, to a logical reasoning and chaste eloquence, disfigured by no gaudy tinsel of rhetoric or declamation, and truly worthy of being placed in parallel with the finest dialogue of antiquity, is handed to us by Xenophon, by Plato, and Cicero. That's stunning. I made a copy of that and I have it beside my desk. The arc of Lafayette's life, in the details of it, in his boarding La Victoire, in his getting to America and fighting at the battles of Brandywine and Gloucester and Barron Hill and Monmouth and Rhode Island, and to say nothing of Yorktown. Elements of wonder surface, elements of awe, and it's in the details. Lafayette is for everybody, anywhere, all the time. Let's talk about the Lafayette effect. This is similar. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, one of the most brilliant men in history. His IQ is estimated to be 220. 130 or higher is supposed to be brilliant. True, intelligence quotients weren't really taken until the early 20th century, but based on how he wrote in his metaphors, that's the estimate. Thomas Jefferson's IQ is estimated to be about 160. I think that underestimates it a little bit, don't you? Furthermore, the smartest president, IQ of 168, John Quincy Adams. Goethe, in any event, he writes a book in 1774, The Sorrows of Young Werther, W-E-R-T-H-E-R. It is popular. It makes him famous. So it's the story of a young man. He loves a young girl. It's unrequited. She doesn't love him. Popular book, widely read. Napoleon is one of his favorites. He read it 7 times. Unrequited love. So now the young man, because his love is not returned, commits suicide. Well, young people start reading this book, and now there are copycat suicides. The Werther effect. I'm arguing that there can be a Lafayette effect. That's the antithesis of that. So young people, knowing Lafayette's story, knowing the details, the sense of wonder, they are provoked to courage, to a sense of purpose. They are provoked to hope in the ideas of liberty, equality, and justice. Agreed. There is no controlled double-blind study that proves the Lafayette effect. It's a project for the AFL. I'll talk with Chuck about it later. The Lafayette effect. Lafayette is a how-to book. We're going to spend some time here. Lafayette is Dale Carnegie reincarnated backwards. Lafayette is a how-to book, and there are 8 chapters. How to grow a sense of purpose. How to discover a noble object for that purpose. How to find poetry in the rituals of daily living. How to see reading is a fire to the imagination. This is chapter 4. Now, when we talk about reading, we're not just talking about written word. We're also talking about travel, immersive reading. So when you travel to unknown places, so the title of Lloyd Kramer's book recently, Traveling to Unknown Places, which I recommend to you, by the way. When you travel to unknown places, there are new experiences, new people that you see. So reading is more than just the written word. And furthermore, an important part of this is observation. You remember Henry James said in The Art of Fiction, said, try to be one of those on whom nothing is lost, to be observant. Lafayette was one of those people. We'll come back and talk about that. Chapter 5, how to see hope as an obligation. Lafayette learned that from his mother-in-law, Henriette, in fact. How to understand that neither triumph nor tragedy is licensed to be unkind. How to create undistracted moments, particularly important today. How to see liberty, equality, and justice as the 3 ideas that unite us. Let's go back and let me collate chapters 1 and 2 and give you a little overview. How to grow a sense of purpose and how to discover a noble object for that purpose. How do you take a young person and instill in them a sense of purpose, a want to do good for community? Well, the first thing that you do, choose your parents well. Beyond that, and for Lafayette, 4 bullet points. First, geography. Lafayette was born in the Auvergne, so 300 miles south of Paris, but he had free roam, free range of volcanic hills and forests. There were no fences on his imagination. So even though it was not articulated, it was clear there was a sense of freedom and liberty. Geography is character, place. Second, the people and relationships. Lafayette was raised by women. So his grandmother on his father's side, Marie Catherine. Peasants would come, Gutschalk says, peasants came 60 miles to get suggestions and recommendations from her, and she would treat them with respect and dignity, and Lafayette took note. Likewise for her two daughters, which be Lafayette's aunts. So Marguerite Madeleine, who never married, may have found men distasteful, I don't know the details, and Louise Charlotte, who married, but her husband died and had one child, Marie, who was about a year older than Lafayette, and Marie was Lafayette's best friend growing up. Lafayette observed how his aunt and his grandmother would treat other people with dignity and respect, and he took that lead. Third, stories. Lafayette's family had been around for 1,000 years. They were alongside Joan of Arc at the siege of Orleans. He heard those stories. Stories matter. His father at the Battle of Minden died. Lafayette heard those stories. They were stories about courage and perseverance, and he took them to heart. Fourth, books. Lafayette was a reader. True, he read Newton, Montesquieu, and Voltaire. But what's more important, he read Plutarch about character, Cicero about duty and obligation, Polybius and Livy and Virgil. And he took those to heart. Reading matters. Place, people, stories, books. It imbues in young folks a sense of purpose. And we know that Lafayette had it. You remember at the age of 8, the Beast of the Gavillon. So 1764, 1767, there was this, nobody knew what it was. Was it an overactive hyena? Was it a lynx? Nobody knew. But it was marauding around the Auvergne and killing women and children and livestock. Apparently, men weren't tasty enough, but it was really doing some damage. And Lafayette felt this obligation to go out and try to find this beast. Even the king's archers got in on it. The beast was never really found, but Lafayette felt that sense of purpose to go out and find it. Furthermore, there was a local newspaper report where someone did confront this beast, but was in so much fear it ran away. And mistakenly, the name in the report was Lafayette. Our Lafayette took umbrage. This was his reputation that was being undermined, and he wrote a scathing editorial, which his grandmother did not send. So we know he had a sense of purpose. Part 2 is how do you find an object for that purpose? For Lafayette, he was a captain in the French army stationed at Metz with his good friends, the Vicomte de Noailles, his best friend, and the Comte de Ségur, those 3 musketeers early on. They were stationed at Metz and in the army, and they first had occasion on a Tuesday, August the 8th, 1775. Lafayette was 17, to hear in earnest from the Duke of Gloucester, who was the estranged brother of King George III, about that rabble in America, merchants and farmers fighting the vaunted British for their independence. They were primed, the 3 of them, but particularly Lafayette. This is what we will do, fighting in America alongside Americans for their independence. That sense of purpose now locked on to its object, and Lafayette persevered. It's a story of wonder and awe. Lafayette is for everybody, anywhere, all the time. And let's talk about reading. Let's go to chapter 4. And keep in mind, reading is not just the written word. It's also immersive reading, traveling. Lafayette had occasion to meet Frederick the Great. He had long wanted to meet Frederick the Great, in fact. after the Battle of Rhode Island on September the 11th, 1778, he wrote his father-in-law, the Duc d'Enghien, saying that he would like to go to Prussia, would like to see that vaunted Prussian military, meet Frederick the Great. So in 1785, he planned on doing just that, going to Prussia and seeing that military, seeing them on maneuvers. And so he made his plans to go and took off in mid-August, in fact, had to get a letter of credit from his bank. This was going to be an expensive trip. And his friend, Lieutenant Colonel Chevalier Gouvion, went along with him. So their itinerary included going to Hesse Castle, to Kassel, which was the capital of Hesse Castle, and then Berlin, and then Vienna, and then returning back to Paris. Gottschalk said that as Lafayette traveled to Prussia all along the route, people of all stations came out to see this hero of the American Revolution, even then, even there. When he arrived in Kassel, he got reacquainted with Baron Wilhelm von Knyphausen. Knyphausen, you recall, had been the commander of the Hessians in America, had faced off with Lafayette, in fact, at the Battle of Brandywine, where he shot in his left calf through and through, September the 11th, 1777, and June 28, 1778, at the Battle of Monmouth. They got reacquainted, and Lafayette afterwards wrote to Washington saying, "We had a good visit. It was calm and it was civil." From Kassel, they traveled on to Berlin. And in Berlin, in fact, Lafayette met Lord Cornwallis, who was there to see the maneuvers likewise. That same day, Lafayette met Frederick the Great. It's interesting that Gottschalk says that Lafayette wrote some of his most poetic prose when he described Frederick the Great, who was now 73 years old. And Lafayette at the time was 27, by the way. But Lafayette said that Frederick the Great, he was riddled with asthma and with gout. Apparently he had tophaceous gout. So the uric acid deposits in the joints, and sometimes it'll drain. And it has a gritty sensation. It looks like dirty chalk. But he had severe gout, and his arthritis was such that his neck was almost lean, flexed over to his right shoulder. But despite that, Frederick would still get up at dawn. He drank 8 cups of coffee a day. And he liked spending time mostly around his Italian greyhounds. But the thing that impressed Lafayette the most, Lafayette said that Frederick the Great had the most beautiful eyes, that sometimes they were friendly, sometimes they could be fiery, but they were so expressive. Lafayette also said that Frederick the Great, an enlightened despot, had a volcanic temper, and Lafayette saw it explode twice. 3 men were arrested as a consequence of that temper. So they met at Berlin, then they moved on to Silesia, including Lord Cornwallis. And at Silesia, every evening, for 8 days, they sat down at table with Frederick the Great for dinners that lasted 3 hours. And Frederick the Great determined the seating arrangements. And he put Lafayette in between the Duke of York, which was King George III's second son, and Lord Cornwallis. Cornwallis said that he did not enjoy the trip because all the flattery went to Lafayette. He said Lafayette and he got along just fine. From Silesia, they also went to Magdeburg. Magdeburg, a decade hence, is where Lafayette would be imprisoned for 1 year, January 4, 1793 to January 4, 1794. Lafayette on this trip also met Frederick William, the nephew to Frederick the Great. Frederick had no children. So Frederick William, his nephew, would become king. And in a decade, it was this Frederick William who would oversee Lafayette's imprisonment. Lafayette took a side trip to Vienna, where he met Emperor Joseph II. Interestingly, the one who introduced Lafayette to the emperor was the Marquis de Noailles. This was Lafayette's uncle-in-law, Adrian's uncle. This was the same Marquis de Noailles. He was the French ambassador in Vienna at the time. But this is the same Marquis de Noailles who, back in March of 1777, when Lafayette went to London, and the Marquis de Noailles was the French ambassador to the court of St. James, the Marquis introduced Lafayette to King George III. This was about a month before Lafayette boarded La Victoire and headed to America to fight the British. Lafayette did get to see that vaunted Prussian army. 30,000 of them on maneuvers, 20,000 in one line. And Lafayette said he was impressed, that they were disciplined, they could maneuver. Lafayette at most commanded 8,000 or 9,000. But in the end, Lafayette said, for all there was to admire, there was no provision for the older soldiers. And in the end, Lafayette said, I had rather be the last farmer in America than the first general in Berlin. Lafayette returned back to Paris in October. It was a 3-month trip. It was remarkable. Wonder and awe. Lafayette is for everybody, anywhere, all the time. Lafayette also had occasion to meet Catherine the Great. In 1786, Lafayette had 2 invitations and he had to choose between them, and he chose to visit Catherine the Great. He was invited to go on a trip down the Crimea with Catherine the Great and Joseph II. This was a great field trip. This was like fly fishing Montana or elk hunting Alaska. Catherine saw herself and wanted others to see her as an enlightened despot. And she subscribed to a literary magazine. And the magazine was called Literary Correspondence, was the name of it. It was published in Paris 2 times a month, and it was published by Baron de Grimm. Now, this was not the same Grimm as the Grimm brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm. They produced their first compilation of 86 tales on December 20th, 1812. This is a different de Grimm. Baron de Grimm in Paris ran in the same intellectual circles as Lafayette, so those two knew one another. When de Grimm was in St. Petersburg, he would play chess and he would play cards with Catherine. Furthermore, he acted as her agent. When he was in Paris, he would buy works of art for her. And when the libraries of Voltaire and Diderot became available, he purchased them and had them sent to St. Petersburg. Catherine had this project. She wanted to construct a universal dictionary. So Russian vocabulary, and alongside, she wanted Native Indian American vocabulary. She got her list of vocabulary words. She sent it to Baron de Grimm, and Baron de Grimm gave it to Lafayette. Now, Catherine was familiar with Lafayette. She knew about him for 2 reasons. Number one, the Comte de Ségur was the French ambassador at St. Petersburg. You remember the Comte de Ségur, the Vicomte de Noailles, best buddies. So back in the day, that was the 3 Musketeers. The Comte de Ségur told Catherine about Lafayette, and Catherine made a comment that Lafayette would be a nice acquaintance to make. Furthermore, in the Literary Correspondence, that literary newsletter, it would critique works of art, but it also made comment about Lafayette's notoriety and his accomplishments. So Catherine was well aware. So Catherine made out her vocabulary list, sent it to Baron de Grimm. Baron de Grimm gave it to Lafayette. Lafayette forwarded it to George Washington, who was familiar with Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley, and to Benjamin Franklin, who was familiar with natives along the Delaware River. And they replied as best they could. Lafayette also had a project, and he needed the help of Catherine. Really, the idea came from Thomas Jefferson. At the time, John Ledyard was in Paris. He was an explorer. He had been with James Cook on Cook's 3rd and final voyage, going from Hawaii up to Alaska, back to Hawaii. where he was killed by natives. Ledyard now in Paris. And Jefferson had this idea. Ledyard is an explorer, therefore, circumnavigate the globe, starting at Paris, St. Petersburg, Siberia, Bering Strait, Alaska, the American Northwest, Virginia, the Atlantic, Paris, and back to St. Petersburg again, around the world. Jefferson wrote out this itinerary, gave it to Lafayette. Lafayette thought it was a great idea. In fact, he was going to subsidize, as was Baron de Grimm. They were going to put some money to it. Lafayette gave the itinerary to Baron de Grimm. They all triangulated through Baron de Grimm. De Grimm got it to Catherine. Comte de Ségur got John Ledyard a passport so he could get into Russia. But Catherine had to sign off on this deal. Well, communication was glacial. It was glacial, 1,700 miles from St. Petersburg to Paris. So in a carriage carrying the mail would have to change horses every 10 to 20 miles. So it took forever to get word. Ledyard got impatient, and he took off for Russia in December of 1786. This was at the same time that Lafayette was making preparation to go on his trip to Russia and go down the Crimea. It would have been a great trip. But on December 27, 1786, Lafayette got a second invitation, and it was from King Louis XVI, inviting him to be a member of the Assembly of Notables. The Treasury was in trouble, and the king needed an advisory board to tell him what to do. The Assembly of Notables. So Lafayette had this choice, and Lafayette could have begged off. He and the king, they dined together, they played cards together, they went hunting together. So Lafayette had this choice: the field trip to the Crimea or the Assembly of Notables, which would have taxed patience and perseverance. Lafayette sent his regrets to Catherine the Great. He saw the Assembly of Notables as a platform that might produce more than just revenue stream. Maybe prison reform, maybe religious toleration. He would be in the Assembly of Notables. He did not take the trip to Crimea. Lafayette is for everybody, anywhere, all the time. The Assembly of Notables, we're still in chapter 4 and on new experiences and reading. Back up to August the 8th, 1786. Finance Minister Alexander de Calonne told King Louis XVI, we are on the verge of bankruptcy. We're near broke. We need new taxes. But they have to be finessed. We have 3 options in order to get them. One is by unilateral declaration. The king just makes a decree and taxes. Well, that was a problem, because whenever the king made a decree, it had to be registered with the Paris Parliament. Now, the Parliament was a judicial organization. There were 13 of these all across France, and the most powerful was there in Paris. And when the king made a decree, it had to be registered with the Parliament, and the Parliament had the authority to reject it, to question it, to stalemate it. And in times past, when they tried to get increased taxes, that's the sort of obstruction they'd run into. Calonne said, that's not the option. We don't want to get bogged down with that. Check that one off. The second was to call the Estates General. The Estates General was an assembly, representatives from all over France who represented one of the 3 estates. So the first estate were clergy, numbered 100,000, second estate nobles, and 400,000, and then the third estate, everybody else, 25 million. But traditionally, voting had always been by estate, which meant that the first and second estates, usually their interests were aligned and they would overrule the third. Rarely the idea of a, quote, national assembly would surface. And when that hit the table, bolt, jolt, stunned silence, because that would be voting by head. That was a different entity entirely, and typically the opposition would muffle it. The decision was made for the third option, Assembly of Notables, because it was felt that calling the Estates General, it was a loose cannon. And furthermore, it would have the authority, Cologne said, to meddle in things where it ought not be meddling. Let's not go there. So the third option appeared to be the least of the evils, an Assembly of Notables. That had been used before. This was an advisory board, hand-picked. And furthermore, Cologne's idea was, well, we'll have all these luminaries to come in, we'll present our request for taxes, it'll be rubber stamped, and then we'll get it registered with a parliament, done deal. So Lafayette would be a member of he got his invitation to be a member of the Assembly of Notables. He thought. When the public roster came out, Lafayette's name was not on it. Thomas Jefferson was suspicious. He figured that Louis XVI redacted Lafayette's name because Lafayette had Republican inclinations. It was no secret. And Jefferson thought, that's what's happened. They've taken your name off this because they're concerned about your leanings. But then before they could make inquiries, the third and final list came out and Lafayette's name was on it. And Lafayette had replaced none other than the Marquis de Noailles. There were 144 of these notables. And they were divided into 7 bureaus. It was like committees. Lafayette was in the second bureau. He was the 9th of 22. And that bureau was presided over by the Comte d'Artois. That was the king's younger brother, who was very conservative. And Lafayette knew him well. Back in the day, when Lafayette, the Comte de Ségur, and the Vicomte de Noailles, and Marie Antoinette, and the Comte de Provence periodically, and the Comte d'Artois, they would go pub crawling together back long ago. The first session was on February 22nd, 11 a.m., and a refurbished warehouse there at Versailles in 1787. Lafayette contributed a little early on, and there were basically 3 reasons for that. One, he had bad bronchitis. He was just trying to get over the bronchitis. The second, he was dealing with some fallout. Lafayette did have a mistress, Madame de Simeon, very attractive, very bright. But her husband committed suicide in January, and the press blamed Lafayette. So Lafayette was trying to do damage control. But the third part, there was a learning curve. Lafayette saw himself as a soldier. He was about bullets and bayonets, and this was different. This was the foil and the épée and the saber of words. It was bullet chess with vocabulary. And Gottschalk said that Lafayette learned debate. Lafayette had given public speeches before, but this was different. This was formal. I debated some back in college, and my guess is Lafayette learned the thrill of an argument, the economy of an argument, a dense argument in reply. Lafayette learned it, and my guess is he liked it. He gave his first formal speech, stepping into the well, there in the Assembly of Notables, on April the 3rd, 1787. And he called for an investigation into land speculation. If the Treasury was in such dire straits, we need to investigate why land, the royal lands, were being sold at such exorbitant prices. Because Lafayette had found out that none other than Cologne, Marie Antoinette, the Comte d'Artois, they had been buying land on the cheap and then selling it to the crown at exorbitant prices. So Lafayette called for this investigation into land speculation. In later speeches, he called for sinecures to be evaporated. He called for prison reform. He said he was not in favor of increasing taxes until they got a grip on expenses. The Vicomte de Comrigny had occasion to observe Lafayette when he was speaking. And it's interesting that he was not a great speaker, And Cormorany said that he had a conversational tone, that he did not use flowery imagery, that he did not use metaphor. He wasn't passionate or fist pounding, but the precise word to make his argument with precision, and that his argument carried weight because of his conviction. Alexander de Calonne was not popular. He was peevish, he was arrogant. And when he told the Assembly of Notables, we're 18 million livres in debt, and the Assembly said, we want to see the books, we want to verify, let's see the ledgers. Calonne claimed executive privilege. Well, that just inflamed the Assembly more. So over the recess, King Louis XVI sacked Calonne, fired him, and in his place invited a member of the Second Bureau, of which Lafayette was a member, the Archbishop Lomini de Brienne. Brienne got a look at the books. Brienne came back to the Assembly of Notables and said, we need new taxes. The deficit was not 18 million livres. The deficit was 114 million livres. 50% of our revenue is going to debt service, largely based on that 1.25 billion that loans that we got to prosecute the American Revolution. We need new taxes. Lafayette stepped to the well, wonder and awe. And he said, if our situation is such that we need new taxes, this body does not have that authority. We need a National Assembly. Bolt, jolt, stunned silence. The Comte d'Artois was the first to jump up and say, sir, are you saying that we want to formally request from the king a meeting of the Estates General? To which Lafayette replied, yes, that and more. 2 years later, in 1789, the Estates General would convene, and it would morph into a National Assembly. Lafayette had become a statesman, and that's what he saw himself as. Their last session was May the 20th, 1787. Lafayette had occasion to see his friend, the Duc de Harcourt, who had recently been engaged to tutor the young Dauphin. Lafayette suggested that he start teaching French history with the year 1787. Lafayette is for everybody, anywhere, all the time. Fourth, talk about Lafayette and the Comte and Frederick Douglass. So I told you that I want to share with you some of the things that we're working on that might help tell Lafayette's story and yet broaden audience appeal, broaden the audience that we invite. And one of the ideas is to pair Lafayette with others whose purpose is liberty, equality, and justice. Frederick Douglass was the face of the African-American community in the 19th century. He was photographed more than any other man in the 19th century. He traveled, because he was a public speaker, he traveled more than anybody except Mark Twain. The press talked about Frederick Douglass more than anybody, with the exception, and speculated about Frederick Douglass, with the exception of Ulysses S. Grant and P.T. Barnum. David Blight, who wrote, Yale University professor, wrote the seminal biography on Frederick Douglass, called him a prophet of freedom. So our idea was to take the apostle of liberty, Lafayette, and the prophet of freedom, Frederick Douglass, and to pair them. So this summer, a 90-minute session, storytelling session on Lafayette and Frederick Douglass, and then perhaps in the fall, a symposium, a 3-hour symposium pairing the two. It is remarkable how similar their lives are, although the context is so dissimilar. We're excited about that. And There is a trust building, racial trust building organization here. They're excited about working with us on that account. Fifth, let's talk about a template for learning Lafayette. Lafayette is all about the details. In order to really learn him, it seems to me it's good to have a textbook. Of course, my whole life has been working around textbooks, but having a good textbook that you can review. Mike Duncan's Hero of Two Worlds is one, or Laura Ricciot's The Marquis Revisited. Be careful about chapter 16. It's a little risque. And furthermore, to really learn them, you have to read them 3 times. The first is just to get the chronology down. The second is to get the common threads. And then the third time, that's synoptical, where you start comparing and contrasting. So how often was he around Hamilton, and what were their common threads? Once you've gotten the basic textbook down, then you need additives. So for the farewell tour, of course, you need Alan Hoffman's translation of Thank You Very Much, Levasseur's book. And once you get that down, Lloyd Kramer's Hero of Two Worlds. That is synoptical reading. Mortimer Adler, who was a philosopher at the University of Chicago, he wrote a 400-page book in 1940 about how to read a book. And he said there are 4 different levels. When you pick up Lloyd Kramer's book, Hero of Two Worlds, it is about relationships. You're reading synoptical reading. It's level 4, and it is spectacular. The other thing, of course, any of Gottschalk's books. Gottschalk wrote 6 books. It only carried Lafayette not up to the age of 33, really, and they're not in print today, but they are available. And there's one, Lafayette in America, that really compiles 3 of Lafayette's, of Gottschalk's books in one. The other that I would suggest to you, and this is excellent reading, this is Lafayette and the Enduring Struggle for Human Rights and Democratic Governments. And so the AFL puts this out, and these essays give you good insight into Lafayette and his thinking. The other that Robert Kraut mentions when he spoke with you here a few weeks ago, European Friends of the American Revolution. And Dr. Kraut has an essay in here, and these are very well done. The other thing not to be underestimated is the AFL Gazette. I'm working my way through the Gazette, and those have some remarkable detailed essays, and I recommend them to you. So having a planned itinerary for learning Lafayette. Now, I said at the top of the key that I was going to present to you and share with you some of the things we're working on to try to broaden the interest and increased audience appeal. And one of the things we've done is taken a page out of Spielberg's playbook. Spielberg, back in 2012, produced Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis. And Daniel Day-Lewis won as Best Actor. They lost out on Best Picture to Argo with Ben Affleck. But Lincoln, that movie is spectacular, and it's based on Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals. But it's about the last 4 months of Lincoln's life, so about 80 pages, and they focus in on that, the details. And that movie, and Daniel Day-Lewis's his performance, wonder and awe in it. But we took that out and wondered, well, can we rhythm and rhyme some of Lafayette's stories, just extracting just one story? And one of the ones that we keyed in on was, you recall, the Duc d'Anne, Adrienne's father. He had 5 daughters. And he needed a husband for Adrienne. She was 12 at the time. And he tapped Lafayette, who was an orphan, 14, very wealthy. So the dowry wasn't a big deal. The Duc d'Anne thought that this was a go. Lafayette and his second-born, Adrienne. So he presented that to his wife, Henriette. And Henriette, she was self-possessed, she was intelligent, and she was adamantly opposed. So this is rhythm and rhymes. And so this is a reading, this is a world premiere. And we were going to have Henriette here, but Henriette turned her ankle this afternoon. She was unable to come. Therefore, Henriette and the Duc d'Anne. And I'm just going to give you a little flavor of this. So, and keep in mind, I need you to suspend disbelief. So, yes, with these, we do need costume, and yes, we need some choreography. Nothing over the top, just a little bit of shoulder, a little bit of arched eyebrow, that sort of thing. And we need music, that is true. And we need props. So, all those things, this is layered. Yes, I have watched the Eras Tour, and yes, I have seen Taylor Swift, and I've noticed that, yes, she writes the songs, that she rhythm and rhymes them, but she has costuming, she has props. Even the microphone has a different costume every time she comes out. So these are layered, and it takes talent to see that. So I gave up on my piano lessons in basketball when I took basketball. Well, the truth is, I was taking piano and basketball at the same time. I came in late to basketball practice, and the coach, in front of all my friends, asked me where I had been. This is in 10th grade. And I said, I've been to piano practice. After all the chuckles, I never went back to piano practice. Had I done that, I'd be able to write some of this music today. So this is a narrator leads off, and then I'm going to jump down to the middle and just give you a flavor of some of this. So the Duc d'Anne has 5 daughters. He arranged for his first daughter, Louise, to marry the Vicomte de Noailles. His second daughter is Adrienne. Adrienne is 12. The Duc d'Anne decides sight unseen that the wealthy orphan Marquis de Lafayette is the perfect match for Adrienne. Lafayette is 14. The Duke suggested this match to his wife, Henriette. She is adamantly opposed. They talked it over. So here we jump in, about a third of the way through. This is Henriette talking about Lafayette. He's from the South. Does he have a big mouth? Raised on a farm. What if he scratches and spits and lacks charm? The Duke. The College du Plessis, that is where he pursues study, they don't permit the scratch and the spit. They do not abide. They take pride in booting boisterous boys doing a bunch of hooting. Henriette. Anyway, what does his father say? This much is true. Lafayette was not yet 2 when on the Minden battlefield an English cannonball failed to yield. It was the pits, Lafayette's father, blown to bits. Well, says Henriette, what of his mother, his sister, or brother? I'm not lying. His dying, bad as it was, not the worst, because at the same time of that battle crime, his mother was pregnant, baby's sister to be regnant. Henriette. Husband gone, baby to dawn. That a good fate at any rate. The Duke. Fate lied, baby died. Dead and cold, 3 months old. Marie, Louise, Jacqueline, Lafayette. But there was more to fret. Henriette. How possibly can that be? Father gone, sister to heaven beyond. What could be worst? What bubble could burst? The Duke. It came fast, she didn't last. His mother sick, died quick. She was 32. Now I ask you, can we not be his family? Henriette. No, let it go. Your felicity is duplicity. You fault me for sons unborn. You shovel scorn on my head for 5 girls instead. Give it a rest. I did my best. You were mad when the 2 sons we had died. I cried. You could not abide 5 daughters in a row. I'm a mother and I know. So the answer is no. Now let it go. The Duke. My word above. When push comes to shove and it does not suit, you can be a horse's patoot. Henriette. What did you mumble? Your words were a rumble. I said the horses are a hoot when they paw and root. I admit it did not sit well, truth to tell, when the Almighty had the gall to take our first son, Paul. Then 5 girls arrived, but I survived. I admit I was not a little bit proud when the Almighty endowed you with a boy. What a joy. We called him Gabriel, but he was not well. The Almighty took him away. I didn't know what to say. How did the Almighty dare to be so unfair? Your baby's first and last passed. Was it retribution, heavenly prosecution? What had I done? The Almighty would give me no son. So this is a 15-minute sketch. And as you go through, you learn how self-possessed Henriette was, how intelligent she was. You also learn that Lafayette did have a sister. She died in April of 1760, Marie Louise Jacqueline Lafayette. And that his mother likewise died, that Henriette almost died of smallpox. And in fact, that is likely how Adrienne became immune, because she was exposed to Henriette. Now, let me just bear with me. I've got you captured. Here's one other. We also have not only these sketches, but what about verse? So, yes, we have verse. And here's a quick example. There's just 3 verses. But here is Lafayette. Lafayette was not a good sailor. So he got seasick. And this is Seasick on La Victoire, or Lafayette's Lament. Now, we need music put to this. People ask me, well, what kind of music do you want? Do you want Broadway? Do you want hip hop? Do you want opera? Do you want country? My reply is yes. Where the talent is, that's what I want. Well, but people are going to say it's just a knockoff of Hamilton. Okay, not a bad thing. It's just that we have more story and content right here, but flexible. We just need the talent. So this is verse. Again, Seasick on La Victoire. So here's the narrator. Lafayette was not a seaman. Seasick on his first voyage to America aboard La Victoire, April 20th, 1777 to June 13th, 1777. And again, aboard on the Alliance, his trip home from Boston to Brest, January the 11th through February the 6th, 1779. The sea was an unpleasant experience. Okay. So here we go. This is the first verse. And furthermore, whenever I think about this, let your mind wheel. So you can see Chuck Flum, I can see as being the front person. And then back in back, we've got this group back here. So there can be our president can be back there. We can have Lloyd Kramer back there, and Paul Spaulding could be back there, and Robert Rhodes Crowd could just be the backup group. I mean, just picture it in your mind's eye. We could have orthopedics on call. So this is the first verse. This is not nice, but Edmund Bryce, you remember he was from Annapolis and he was aboard La Victoire with Lafayette. This is not nice, but Edmund Bryce confirms the tale. When we set sail, it was Sunday, Passaic Bay. The sun shone bright. Land out of sight began my plight. And then here's the chorus. Feathers and tar, drunk at the bar. Take the money, call me, honey. I don't care, but anywhere beats throwing up. Pass me the cup. Second verse. Waves went higher, my insides dire, side to side roll. I grabbed a pole. Is there some trick from being sick? My hammock swings, nausea it brings. Wish I had wings. Lord, take me now. End it somehow. And the chorus again. Feathers and tar, drunk at the bar. Take the money, call me, honey. I don't care, but anywhere beats throwing up. Pass me the cup. Third, last verse. It seems like years, many careers, 1 week and done. It was not fun. Now where to run? I could not eat. I took no meat. Water came back, pitched in the rack. I tried to read. That was pure greed. Insides refused, misery abused. Advice to you, you have no clue if you cross seas. This will serve, please. Swim. Feathers and tar, drunk at the bar. Take the money, call me, honey. I don't care, but anywhere beats throwing up. Pass me the cup. We've got a catalog of these, but we need the talents. And we have tried to recruit some talent, but it's easier said than done. So taking this and then wrapping music, cloaking it in music. Let me just one other. This is Lafayette at the Battle of Brandywine. This is when he first sees Washington at City Tavern. And this is Lafayette speaking. With quiet, calm, and grace, self-confidence on his face. Taller than us all. Every move measured, every word treasured. They rushed to shake his hand, this man of Plutarch brand. Later that evening we met. My name is Lafayette. Not much of the world had I seen, still an awkward 19. Unaccomplished, lanky, and green. General Washington had a sense that I was nervous, I was tense. His calm words put me at ease, stopped the buckling of my knees. Could be, perhaps he saw in me some future possibility. The son he never had, patient and kind, and I was glad. City Tavern, that first place where he and I met face to face. So we have a catalog of these. The idea is can we layer them? Can we get costumes? Can we get music, which is the big deal because that resonates with folks? And then could we put a series of these together and have a concert? And then would it have broader audience appeal is the ideal. Now, finally, I mentioned June the 11th through June the 14th, the AFL annual at New Orleans. I hope to see you all there. You've been very patient. Thank you very much. Chuck, you're up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ingram. I really appreciate you being, ladies and gentlemen, you've just been Ingrammed. That's exactly what just happened to you. I'm gonna, we are running late. We actually tonight was a all-time high. We had 90 participants tonight, so I can't thank you enough. A lot of the people that Richard Ingram mentioned are on this call today, so I'm really excited about that as well. It's already 8:37, but I can't let you guys go without asking a question or two. Are there anybody that wants to make a comment or a question for Dr. Richard Ingram? Let's see. Hold on. I got some here. All right. You mentioned Lafayette was raised by women. Is it not true that in his earliest years he was raised for 10 years by two men, especially including Fayon? Then didn't he successfully obtain his graduate degree under his mentor, a guy named, no, that is not Dan. That is not correct. And I'm sorry that, no, he was raised by women, 100% sure. But I think you're trying to be clever there, and I appreciate it very much. I got a lot of comments of great things for you, Dr. Ingram. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
Or a music background to help with this project?
So we're recruiting, and
Yeah.
so wherever we find talent, and this does take a lot of work, and compensation
Yeah.
is an important part of this. So asking people just to contribute their time freely does not quite, because this is going to take some work, and you have to percolate on it, you have to marinate it a little bit, but we're willing to contribute and raise money to that effect. So if you know talent who might be interested, and furthermore, it has to pass muster. So it cannot, so a Philip Glass, a dissonant thing, that may be academic, but for broad audiences, that's not going to have an appeal. So yes, I'm very interested in any names you might have. I'd be happy to talk with them.
Please just email me at americanfriendsoflafayette@gmail.com. I got a lot of comments, Dr. Ingram, that everybody really enjoyed this. I have somebody that's an opera singer. Please reach out to me and I'll hook you up with Dr. Ingram. I have something from Lloyd Kramer, who was mentioned quite a bit tonight. Speaking of people who stood in awe of Lafayette, have you read Charles Sumner's speech at Cooper Union, November 1860? Lafayette, the faithful one. He inspired Sumner's steadfast abolitionism. Thank you, Lloyd. And everybody should know about that.
And may I comment on Lloyd Kramer? Lloyd Kramer, I mean, not because he's there, but his book, Hero of Two Worlds, it deserves reading, rereading, and reading a third time. I've said that before, and I repeat that. And furthermore, I was unaware that Lloyd Kramer had a more recent book, 2023, I think, Traveling to Unknown Places. And that book is well-researched, and I would recommend it likewise.
And I would say if you're going to read Lloyd's book 3 times, you should buy 3 copies. Okay, everybody buy 3 copies of Lloyd's book right away. Please do that. I see we have Mark Schneider on the call. Good to see you, Mark. Everybody else, any other questions? Let me wrap things up by saying thank you so much, Dr. Ingram. I knew tonight was going to be special. I was really excited tonight, and we'll certainly hope to see you in New Orleans, and I think we'll see you in June. Thank you so much.
Thank you.